Welcome to Sinister Serials, where shadows whisper and every tale chills to the... On Weird Wednesday, cosmic horrors from beyond the stars will haunt your dreams. This Weird Wednesday, journey with us to the sands of Egypt in the Shifting Sands of Zaraleth. An expedition led by Dr. Harris seeks ancient truths but finds sinister mysteries instead. As supernatural threats and betrayals unravel, the team faces their darkest fears. Will they escape Zaraleth's grasp, or will history ominously repeat itself?
Chapter 13. The desert night shattered as Sinclair's scream pierced the air, a visceral cry that echoed through the dunes and cliffs surrounding the camp. She bolted upright, her heart pounding, the images from her nightmare still vivid in her mind's eye. The vision of Fitzgerald kneeling before a sand altar, chanting Dr. Chang's name, while a pulsing red crystal cast an eerie crimson glow, lingered like a malevolent specter. Sinclair's breath came in ragged gasps as she fought to regain her composure, her logical mind warring with the primal fear that gripped her. The copper taste of blood on her tongue served as a chilling reminder of the dream's ritualistic sacrifice, and the unnatural stillness of the desert only amplified her unease. It was as if the ancient sands themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the nightmare to bleed into reality. As she emerged from her tent, Sinclair's gaze fell upon the dying embers of their campfire, the fading glow casting twisted shadows that seemed to mock the expedition's dwindling unity. The once comforting presence of her companions now felt like a gathering of strangers, each harboring secrets that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their sanity. The crunch of footsteps on sand drew Sinclair's attention, and she turned to see Fitzgerald approaching, his face etched with the same haunted expression that she knew all too well. His disheveled appearance and the wild look in his eyes spoke volumes about the horrors that had infiltrated his own dreams.
You saw it too, didn't you?
Sinclair asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
The altar, the crystal, and...
She hesitated, the name catching in her throat.
Chang.
Fitzgerald nodded grimly, his hand instinctively reaching for the saber at his side, as if the weapon could somehow ward off the intangible terrors that stalked their minds.
I saw Harris's corpse on that accursed altar,
he said, his voice rough with emotion.
And Chang. He was rambling about ancient desert gods, his eyes gleaming with a madness I've never seen before.
Sinclair's heart sank as she processed Fitzgerald's words, the subtle differences in their shared visions only deepening the sense of unease that coiled in her gut. While her dream had depicted Fitzgerald as the sacrificial victim, his nightmare had replaced him with Harris's lifeless form. The discrepancy hinted at a sinister manipulation, as if the entity that haunted their sleep sought to drive a wedge between them, to shatter the fragile trust that had been their only refuge in this desolate land. The realization that they could no longer afford the luxury of gentle questioning or patient understanding settled over Sinclair like a leaden cloak. The threat that loomed over them was too close, too potent, to be met with anything less than decisive action. She straightened her spine, a cold determination hardening her features as she met Fitzgerald's gaze.
Gather your weapons.
Sinclair said, her voice laced with a resolve she barely recognized as her own.
We're going to the ruins. Chang has answers he owes us.
Her words hung in the air, a declaration of intent that shattered the brittle peace of the camp. There was no turning back now, no retreating into the comfort of denial or the safety of ignorance. They were willingly walking into the heart of their nightmares, driven by a desperate need for truth, no matter how terrible it might be. As they prepared to leave, Sinclair's gaze was drawn to the distance, where a flicker of crimson light caught her eye. For a moment, she wondered if it was merely a reflection of the crystal from her dream, a trick of the mind brought on by the weight of her own fears. But as she watched, the light seemed to pulse with a malevolent intensity, a silent beckoning that sent a chill down her spine. Fitzgerald, too, had noticed the eerie glow, his hand tightening on the hilt of his saber.
We're not alone out here.
He muttered, his voice low and grim.
Whatever that thing is, it's waiting for us.
Sinclair nodded, her gaze lingering on the darkness where Dr. Chang's tent stood, a silent sentinel at the edge of the camp. Was he a pawn in this unfolding nightmare, she wondered, or the architect of their potential demise? The uncertainty gnawed at her, a festering wound that threatened to poison her resolve. But there was no time for doubts, no room for hesitation. With a final glance at the dying embers of their campfire, Sinclair and Fitzgerald set out towards the ruins, their footsteps echoing in the pre-dawn stillness. As they walked, a low, inhuman moan drifted on the wind, a sound that was part cry and part hunger, a chilling portent of the monstrous power that awaited them. The fear that had gripped Sinclair's heart had not disappeared, but it had hardened into a grim acceptance, a steely determination to face the horrors that lay ahead. This was no longer a quest for knowledge or discovery, but a battle for survival, a desperate struggle against forces that defied comprehension. Sentimentality and trust were luxuries they could no longer afford, not when the very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling around them. As the ruins loomed before them, their ancient stones cast in shades of blood and shadow by the first light of dawn, Sinclair and Fitzgerald exchanged a look of silent understanding. Whatever awaited them in the heart of that labyrinthine maze, they would face it together, bound by a shared nightmare and a grim determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The desert watched, its shifting sands concealing secrets that threatened to shatter their minds and consume their souls, as they ventured into the unknown, ready to confront the cosmic horror that had infiltrated their dreams and twisted their reality. The ruins of Zaraleth loomed before Sinclair and Fitzgerald, ancient stones stained by moonlight that cast grotesque shadows across crumbling structures. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the ruins, torches in hand, the weight of Dr. Chang's potential betrayal settled upon them like a suffocating cloak, as oppressive as the desert air that clung to their skin. Each step they took was a battle against the growing sense of unease that gnawed at their souls, a physical manifestation of the doubt and suspicion that had replaced the fragile trust they once shared. The scent of ancient dust mingled with a sickening, metallic tang, an odor that seemed to seep from the very stones themselves, a silent testament to the horrors that lay in wait. Sinclair's focus was razor-sharp, a desperate need to confront Dr. Chang, driving her forward with a determination that bordered on obsession. She had to see him, to tear away the mask of normalcy that had shielded him from their scrutiny, to either confirm or deny the betrayal that their nightmares had so cruelly suggested. But even as she clung to that singular purpose, Sinclair's mind was a battlefield, logic warring against the insidious whispers of the nightmare that had shattered her sleep. Was Fitzgerald still an ally, she wondered, or had the red crystal's malevolent influence begun to twist his mind as well, turning him into yet another pawn in this cosmic game of madness? The torchlight flickered across the walls of the ruins, revealing disturbing carvings that bore no resemblance to the hieroglyphs they had expected to find. Instead, writhing shapes danced in the shadows, their forms so alien and unsettling that Sinclair's head began to ache as she tried to decipher their meaning. It was as if the very stones were alive, pulsing with an unholy energy that defied comprehension. Fitzgerald's voice, strained and urgent, cut through the oppressive silence.
"Look!"
he said, pointing to a crude altar that stood at the center of the chamber they had entered. The stone was stained with an unidentifiable, rust-colored substance, its surface marred by deep gouges that looked like claw marks. It was a gruesome sight, but not the ritual sight that had haunted their nightmares. The mismatch between their dreams and the reality before them only fueled their uncertainty, a gnawing doubt that threatened to unravel the last threads of their sanity. Were the nightmares twisted premonitions, glimpses of a future yet to unfold? Or were they cruel illusions, tailored to break their minds and spirits? As if in answer to their unspoken fears, a chilling wind whipped through the ruins, its icy fingers extinguishing one of their torches with a hiss. The darkness that rushed in to fill the void seemed alive, a writhing, malevolent presence that pressed against their skin like a physical force. An instinctive fear, unlike anything they had experienced in the desert before, gripped Sinclair and Fitzgerald, a primal terror that set their hearts racing and their breath coming in ragged gasps.
"Something's wrong here,"
Fitzgerald managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Sinclair forced herself to take a step forward, her terror tempered by a defiance that burned like a flame in her chest.
We find Chang.
She said, her words a desperate bid to maintain some semblance of control.
Then we worry about getting out.
But even as she spoke, Sinclair knew that their path was no longer their own. Each step they took felt like a surrender, a capitulation to the unseen forces that were drawing them deeper into the heart of the ruins. It was as if they were puppets, their strings pulled by an invisible hand that guided them towards a fate they could not begin to comprehend. As they pressed on, a sickening, pulsating glow began to emanate from the depths of the ruins, a light that seemed to throb in time with the beating of their own hearts. The air itself seemed to hum with a discordant hymn, an eerie echo of the chanting that had haunted their nightmares. The glow reflected dully off something wet and slick, a vast, dark puddle that stretched out before them like a malevolent sea. It was an impossibility, a body of water that had no place in the arid depths of the desert, and yet there it was, a mocking reminder of the twisted reality they had stumbled into. Fitzgerald's hand on her arm brought Sinclair to a sudden halt, his whisper barely audible over the pounding of her own heart.
Look,
he said, his finger pointing to a shattered piece of what might have once been a mirror. But the reflection that stared back at them was not their own, but a nightmarish distortion. Their features stretched and elongated into grotesque parodies of humanity. It was a sight that shattered the last vestiges of their composure, a brutal confirmation of the madness that had consumed their world. The chanting grew louder, a deafening cacophony that seemed to fill the very air around them. And then, from the depths of the inky puddle, a monstrous shape began to rise, its form a writhing mass of tentacles and pulsating flesh that defied description. Sinclair and Fitzgerald stood frozen, their minds reeling as they tried to comprehend the horror that was unfolding before them. The fear that had gripped them was still there, but had been warped into something new, something that transcended mere terror. They were pawns, they realized, helpless pieces in a cosmic game that was beyond their understanding. The creature that rose from the puddle was not just a physical manifestation of their nightmares, but a glimpse into the true nature of the universe, a revelation that threatened to shatter their very sanity. As the creature's form solidified, its eyes fixing upon them with a malevolent intelligence that seemed to pierce their very souls, Sinclair and Fitzgerald knew that they were no longer explorers or adventurers, but insignificant specks in the face of an ancient, all-consuming darkness. The ruins of Zaraleth had become a portal, a gateway to a realm of cosmic horror that defied comprehension. And as they stood there, frozen in the face of the unspeakable, they knew that their journey had only just begun, a descent into madness from which there could be no escape. The creature's gaze held them, a silent promise of the horrors yet to come, as the chanting reached a fevered pitch and the ruins themselves seemed to pulse with an unholy life. In that moment, Sinclair and Fitzgerald understood the true meaning of despair, a realization that would haunt them until the end of their days, and perhaps beyond. The echoes of Sinclair's scream still rang in Fitzgerald's ears as he wrestled her away from the edge of the inky puddle. The monstrous entity, now clearly visible, pulsed with a mocking light that mirrored the frantic beat of his own heart. The ruins of Zaraleth had become a twisted stage, the moonlight casting grotesque shadows on the creature's otherworldly form. Fitzgerald's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, his training as a soldier warring with the primal terror that gripped his soul. He fought an impossible battle, struggling to protect Sinclair from the creature's malevolent presence, while also shielding her from her own desperate actions. And through it all, the need for answers burned within him, a desperate quest for understanding amidst the chaos that had engulfed them. But logic had long since been buried beneath a tide of rage and despair, the confirmation of his nightmare shattering any semblance of rational thought. The scene had played out with a sickening perfection, each detail etched into his mind like a brand. And at the center of it all was Dr. Chang, the man who had once been their trusted companion, now a figure of suspicion and doubt. The stench of the puddle was nauseating, a foul miasma that clung to the back of Fitzgerald's throat with every labored breath. The creature's pulsing glow throbbed in his temples, a mocking echo of his own ragged heartbeat, a reminder of the alien presence that had invaded their world. As Fitzgerald struggled to keep Sinclair from the creature's grasp, a movement caught his eye. Dr. Chang, his face a mask of eerie calm, stepped forward, his eyes fixed upon the monstrous entity with a look of reverence that bordered on madness.
"My lord awakens,"
he intoned, his voice a sibilant whisper that cut through the chaos like a knife.
"The pact will be fulfilled."
The words were a grotesque parody of devotion, a sickening confirmation of the betrayal that Fitzgerald had feared. The red crystal around Chang's neck pulsed in time with the creature's own malevolent glow, a physical manifestation of the unholy bond that had been forged between them. Sinclair's struggles ceased, her body going rigid in Fitzgerald's grasp as she stared at Chang with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The doctor's brazen display of loyalty to the creature drove a wedge between them, shattering any lingering shred of doubt that might have remained. And then, with a suddenness that left them all reeling, the creature began to sink back into the inky depths of the puddle, its form dissolving into the darkness like a nightmare fading with the dawn. But there was no relief in its retreat, no sense of victory or triumph. Instead, the creature's withdrawal felt tactical, a calculated move in a game whose rules they could not begin to comprehend. Sinclair tore herself free from Fitzgerald's grasp, her eyes blazing with a fury that bordered on madness. He braced himself for a physical confrontation, his body tensing as he prepared to restrain her once more. But instead of lunging at the creature or at Chang, Sinclair rounded on Fitzgerald, her voice thick with accusation.
You knew.
She hissed, her words dripping with venom.
You knew what he was, what he had done, and you said nothing.
Fitzgerald's jaw clenched, his own anger rising to match her own. He pointed his gun at Chang, the barrel trembling slightly in his grasp.
You
He growled, his voice raw with emotion.
You brought this thing here? You're no man at all.
The accusation hung in the air between them, a stark divide that mirrored the fractures that had formed within their once united group. Sinclair hesitated, her conflicted expression a reflection of the struggle that had plagued Fitzgerald in the earlier scenes. The trust that had once bound them together was unraveling, the threads of their alliance fraying under the weight of betrayal and suspicion. As they stood there, frozen in a moment of tense confrontation, the creature's gurgling laughter echoed from the depths of the puddle, a chilling promise of its inevitable return. The sound was a mocking reminder of their own helplessness, a taunt that drove home the realization that they were mere pawns in a game far beyond their understanding. Sinclair's eyes flicked to the red crystal that hung around Chang's neck, then back to Fitzgerald, a silent question in her gaze. Who was the real enemy now? The creature that had risen from the depths, or the man who had once been their trusted companion? Fitzgerald's arm began to tremble, the weight of the gun suddenly unbearable. He lowered the weapon slowly, not out of mercy or forgiveness, but from sheer exhaustion. Fighting Chang now would accomplish nothing, he realized, save for playing directly into the creature's hands. Chang's voice broke the silence, his usual calm replaced by a fanatical fervor that sent chills down Fitzgerald's spine.
"The offering,
he intoned, his eyes wide and gleaming in the moonlight.
it must be completed. One of you will usher in his reign."
The words were a death knell, a final confirmation of the horror that had taken root in their midst. Fitzgerald's despair deepened, his mind reeling as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal that had just been revealed. He no longer fought to understand, to seek answers or explanations for the madness that had engulfed them. Now, his only goal was to keep them alive, to buy them another hour, another minute, in the face of the unspeakable evil that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own. The conflict that had erupted between them was a mere shadow of the greater battle that loomed on the horizon. The creature's presence was an ever-present threat, a supernatural force that defied all reason and sanity. And yet, even as they stood on the brink of annihilation, the team's own internal strife threatened to tear them apart from within. Every glance, every hesitation was a betrayal of the unraveling trust that had once bound them together. Sinclair's doubts, Fitzgerald's accusations, and Chang's chilling revelation had shattered any illusion of unity or purpose. As they stood there, Frozen in the ruins of Zaraleth, the question hung unspoken between them. Were they doomed to fall apart, to succumb to the creature's malevolent influence, even before it launched its next attack? Fitzgerald's gaze met Sinclair's, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible choice that lay before them. They could stand together, united in their defiance of the creature's will, or they could allow their own fears and suspicions to consume them, dooming them all to a fate worse than death. In that moment, as the moonlight cast its eerie glow upon the scene of their confrontation, Fitzgerald knew that their only hope lay in the strength of their own resolve. They had to find a way to trust one another, to forge a new alliance in the face of the unspeakable horror that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own. For if they failed, if they allowed the creature's influence to divide them, then all would be lost. The offering would be made, and the reign of the monster that lurked within the depths of Zaraleth would begin, plunging the world into an age of darkness from which there could be no escape. Sinclair stared at Fitzgerald, his gun still trembling in his hand. He had become the mirror image of her nightmare vision, and the knowledge that he might be right was an icy fist closing around her heart. The ruins of Zaraleth seemed to close in around them, the moonlight painting the scene in stark contrasts, every shadow a potential hiding place for the lurking horror that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own. She searched desperately for logic amidst the madness, for some shred of reason that could guide them through the tempest of betrayal and despair. But Chang's twisted devotion and the creature's undeniable proof of existence had shattered her defenses, leaving her raw and exposed in the face of the unimaginable. A part of her screamed to follow Fitzgerald, to trust in his instincts and his accusation of Chang's treachery. He was right, she knew, and the thought of aligning herself with a traitor sent a wave of revulsion through her. But another voice, insidious and persistent, whispered in the depths of her mind, reminding her of Fitzgerald's own nightmare. What if he too was in need of protection, not just from the creature, but from the darkness that had taken root within his own soul? The acrid scent of the puddle mingled with the cold sweat that beaded on her skin, a physical manifestation of the terror that gripped her. The throbbing of the red crystal around Chang's neck seemed to synchronize with her own ragged pulse, a mocking reminder of the unholy bond that had been forged between the doctor and the entity that had claimed him. Fitzgerald's snarl cut through the charged air like a knife, his words dripping with venom as he addressed Chang.
You're not getting either of us,
he growled, his voice raw with anger and desperation.
Fight your own damn battles.
The finality in his tone broke something inside Sinclair, a shattering of the last vestiges of hope that had sustained her through the nightmare of their expedition. This was not the act of a rational man, she realized, but the lashing out of a soul consumed by grief and fear. In his desperation to protect them, to shield them from the horror that had claimed Chang, Fitzgerald risked sealing their doom, driving them further into the waiting jaws of the entity that hungered for their souls. A cold calmness descended upon Sinclair, not the resignation of defeat, but a terrible, ruthless clarity that cut through the ruins of her own hopes and dreams. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they could not afford to succumb to the darkness that had consumed Fitzgerald, to allow their own fears and suspicions to tear them apart from within. Her voice, steady and resolute, cut through the charged air like a blade.
No, Captain.
She said, her words a declaration of defiance in the face of the unthinkable.
He's getting me.
The look of horror that crossed Fitzgerald's face mirrored her own internal revulsion, a visceral reaction to the words that had just spilled from her lips. But even as he opened his mouth to protest, to argue against the madness of her decision, Sinclair stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Chang. It was a calculated act of defiance, a denial of the creature's right to choose its own sacrifice, to force their hand in the twisted game that it had initiated. By offering herself as bait, as a willing participant in the entity's malevolent design, Sinclair sought to shift the balance of power, to gain some measure of control over the nightmare that had engulfed them all. Fitzgerald's shout of protest echoed unheard, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the ruins. Sinclair knew that she was gambling, not just with her own life, but with the lives of her companions, with the very fabric of their sanity. But in that moment, as she stood before Chang, her chin raised in a gesture of defiance, she knew that there was no other choice. Chang's expression shifted from startled surprise to triumphant glee, the red crystal around his neck flaring with a sickening brightness that cast blood-red shadows across his face. Sinclair's stomach churned at the sight, at the realization that her gamble had played directly into the entity's hands. But even as the doubt and fear clawed at her mind, Sinclair forced herself to look past the surface, to search for some flicker of uncertainty or hesitation in Chang's expression. Was this truly a victory for the creature, she wondered, or had her unexpected decision thrown it off balance, disrupting the carefully laid plans that had brought them to this moment? She glanced over her shoulder, meeting Fitzgerald's gaze with a silent plea for understanding. His expression shifted from fury to calculation, and finally to a chilling resignation that sent a shiver down her spine. He understood, she realized, and he hated her for it, for the choice that she had made, for the sacrifice that she had willingly embraced. Chang's voice, low and reverent, broke the silence that had fallen between them.
My lord hungers,
he intoned, his eyes glinting with a fanatical light that sent a chill through Sinclair's veins.
and he shall be fed.
The fear that had gripped Sinclair's heart did not vanish, but as she allowed herself to be led deeper into the ruins, a flicker of defiance ignited within her, a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. She would not be a mere victim, she vowed, but a player in the game that the entity had initiated, a willing participant in the dance of madness and despair. Even if it cost her everything, even if it meant sacrificing her own life and sanity, Sinclair knew that she would not go quietly into the darkness. She would fight, with every ounce of strength and cunning that she possessed, to unravel the mysteries that had brought them to this accursed place, to understand the nature of the horror that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own. As she followed Chang deeper into the heart of the ruins, Sinclair's mind raced with the implications of her decision, with the knowledge that she had willingly placed herself in the path of an unspeakable evil. But even as the terror threatened to overwhelm her, she clung to the flicker of hope that burned within her, the belief that knowledge, no matter how terrible, could be a weapon against the darkness that sought to consume them all. Her motivations, she knew, were not purely altruistic. There was a hunger within her, a desperate need to understand the forces that had brought them to this moment, to unravel the secrets that lay hidden within the ruins of Zaraleth. It was the same drive that had led them on this expedition, the same thirst for knowledge that had propelled them into the unknown, now twisted and distorted into a deadly gamble that could only end in salvation or damnation. But as she walked, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence of the ruins, Sinclair knew that there could be no turning back. She had made her choice, and the consequences, whatever they might be, were hers to bear. All that remained was to see the game through to its bitter end, to face the horrors that lay ahead with the same unwavering resolve that had brought her to this moment. For in the heart of the ruins, in the twisted embrace of the entity that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own, Sinclair knew that she would find the answers that she sought, the truth that had eluded them all. And if that truth demanded a price, if it required the sacrifice of her own life and sanity, then so be it. She would pay it gladly, knowing that in the end, her defiance, her refusal to succumb to the darkness, would be the ultimate act of rebellion against the forces that sought to destroy them all. The red crystal around Chang's neck glowed with a fiery intensity, seeming to mock Sinclair as she followed him deeper into the labyrinth of ruins. Every whisper of the wind sounded like the creature's echoing laughter, a chilling reminder of the fate that awaited her at the end of this twisted path. The air grew heavy, unnaturally still, as if the world itself held its breath in anticipation of the sacrifice to come. The moonlight cast deceptive shadows on the walls, conjuring monstrous shapes that danced and writhed in the periphery of Sinclair's vision, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. Sinclair fought against the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. Was she truly a sacrifice, she wondered, or had her desperate gamble forced the entity into a negotiation, a battle of wills that could determine the fate of them all? There was only one way to find out, and as she descended deeper into the heart of the ruins, she steeled herself for the revelations that lay ahead. The urge to run, to flee from the madness that had consumed Dr. Chang and the entity that pulled his strings, screamed within her. Yet, even as the primal fear clawed at her mind, Sinclair pushed deeper into her own shadowed resolve, mirroring her physical journey into the darkness that enveloped them. The scent of the puddle lingered in the air, cloying and sickly sweet, a constant reminder of the creature's presence. Each rustle of fabric, each scrape of stone against stone, became a sign of the entity lurking just out of sight, watching and waiting for the moment to strike. Chain's footsteps were oddly muted, swallowed by the oppressive silence that hung over the ruins like a shroud. As they entered a hidden chamber, the moonlight caught on crudely carved symbols that adorned the walls, the same ones that had haunted Sinclair's nightmares. The red crystal's glow intensified, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to draw the very life force from the air around them. But this was not the altar of her vision, not the site of the bloody sacrifice that had plagued her dreams. Instead, at the center of the chamber, there was a well, its depths filled not with water, but with the same inky blackness that had formed the creature's puddle. Chang knelt before the well, his reverence replaced by a disturbing hunger that sent a chill down Sinclair's spine. It was not blood he sought, she realized, but understanding, a glimpse into the twisted secrets that lay hidden within the depths of the entity's power. Revulsion battled with a terrifying fascination as Sinclair gazed upon the scene before her. This was the source, she knew, the wellspring from which their expedition's doom had flowed, the nexus of the ancient evil that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own. Forcing herself closer, Sinclair's voice was barely a whisper as she addressed the kneeling figure before her.
What does your lord offer?
She asked, the words tasting like ashes on her tongue.
Why me?
Chang's smile was unsettlingly beatific as he turned to face her, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light that sent a shiver down her spine.
Zaraleth is not a mere god,
he said, his voice reverberating with a power that seemed to emanate from the very stones around them.
He is knowledge, power beyond mortal ken. You, with your vision, were marked for this gift.
As he spoke, Chang dipped the crystal into the well, its fiery glow merging with the inky darkness below. Sinclair felt a sudden pull, not towards the well itself, but towards something deeper, a connection that seemed to flow through the very carvings that adorned the chamber's walls. The markings flared with an alien blue light, their patterns shifting and writhing in a dance that defied comprehension. Chang's cry of triumph echoed through the chamber, a sound that was at once exultant and terrifying in its intensity. But even as the crystal pulsed with the energy of the well, the ground beneath them began to tremble, a deep, ominous rumble that shook the very foundations of the ruins. Chang stumbled, his grip on the crystal faltering, and in that moment, the artifact shattered, its fragments scattering into the inky depths below. The shards glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, their broken edges reflecting the horror that had consumed Dr. Chang's soul. For a moment, Sinclair felt nothing, a void that seemed to stretch out into eternity, as if the very fabric of reality itself had been torn asunder. And then, a whisper, not of words, but of a fragment of awareness, vast and inhuman, brushed against her mind. It was a presence that defied comprehension, a glimpse into a realm of knowledge and power that no mortal mind could hope to grasp. As quickly as it had come, the presence retreated, leaving Sinclair changed, a part of her forever marked by the touch of the entity that had claimed Dr. Chang as its own. Screams echoed from the entrance to the ruins, the sound of Fitzgerald's voice, ragged with desperation and fear. Sinclair's heart raced, the realization of what had transpired, of the horrors that had been unleashed, crashing over her like a tidal wave. But even as the fear threatened to consume her, a chilling anticipation began to take hold, a sense of purpose that burned like a flame in the darkness. She knew, without knowing how, what the entity planned, the twisted game that it sought to play with their lives and souls. And yet, Even in that moment of despair, a whisper of hope began to take root in her heart, a sense that they might still have a chance to fight back, to resist the darkness that sought to claim them all. It would take courage, she knew, and a willingness to face the horrors that lay ahead, to delve into the very heart of the nightmare that had engulfed them. But as she stood there, the shattered remains of the crystal glittering at her feet, Sinclair knew that she would not falter, that she would not succumb to the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let the entity claim her now, to let the knowledge and power that it offered corrupt her soul as it had corrupted Dr. Chang's. With a deep breath, she turned towards the entrance to the chamber, towards the screams that echoed through the ruins, a clarion call to action that she could not ignore. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, the horrors that awaited them unknown and unknowable. But Sinclair knew that she would face them, that she would stand against the darkness with every ounce of strength and determination that she possessed. For in the end, it was not just her own fate that hung in the balance, but the fate of them all, the fate of the world itself, and the secrets that lay hidden within the ruins of Zaraleth. And so, with a final glance at the shattered crystal, at the twisted remnants of Dr. Chang's betrayal, Sinclair stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead, to confront the entity that had brought them to this moment, and to fight for the future that hung in the balance, no matter the cost.
Thank you for joining us on another spine-chilling journey, where nightmares come to life and horror knows no bounds. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're brave enough, step through the door and subscribe to Sinister Serials, where every day brings a new flavor of fear, from macabre Mondays to thriller Thursdays. And don't forget to check out our other terrifying tales, waiting to be discovered in our library of horror. Until next time, keep the lights on, if you dare.